This week we're going to explore the exciting world of color. There are many groups in color: primary, secondary, cool colors, and also warm colors. They are organized very nicely on a color wheel. So you'll see that the primary colors make a triangle and the secondaries are in between. Complementary colors are actually across from each other on the color wheel. So yellow and purple will be across, just like green and red. These colors look really good side by side, but they don't mix very well. So if you see a color that are beside each other on the color wheel, start mixing, because those make beautiful new colors. However, if they're across from each other, side by side is the way to go. Last week we had some fun just exploring different colors and textures and lines and mixing different things depending on what your photograph looked like. This week we're going to have a little fun mixing primary colors into secondary colors. So I went ahead, I'm using paints this week. If you don't have any paints, you can again use any material that you have at your home or in your classroom. But the most important thing is that you're trying out different color blends through the primaries. I only put fresh paint of yellow, blue, and red so that I can start with my primaries and then make my secondary colors. I'm laying down some yellow. Again, you could do this with a crayon or a different medium. And then on top, I will put another primary color, and you'll start to see the magic happen. When blending and exploring my primary colors and pushing them into secondary colors, I like to use a lot of scrap paper that I have sitting around. These aren't my nicest pieces. This may be pieces that have already been cut. They may be damaged because they got splashed a little bit, but they're still in pretty good shape. That really allows me to just kind of use all the space. Once these dry, I'm going to be cutting these colors and textures out. I'm actually going to use all these new secondary colors in a collage to make a funky face. That comes a little bit later. So with that in mind, I try to think of different patterns or textures that I may like, meaning I may repeat a line over and over as I blend. I may use different brushes. You may have noticed I had a thicker brush at first and now I have a thinner one. I may tap the brush. I may add water in my brush to thin out a lot of the paint if it looks like it's getting too thick or not blending. If you're not getting your secondary color that you want to see, it's because you have too much of one color and not enough of the other. So just experiment back and forth, play around with your primary colors until you get the color you want. Like I say, a lot of times the water can thin the color out, and I just use the water to get some of those lighter tones. Have fun and use all your space. I put this red sheet underneath so I can take my paint all the way to the edge if I wanted to. Another cool technique you may want to try when mixing your primaries into secondary is etching. I love to use the back of my paintbrush. You could do this with a pencil or a stick, and you can scratch away the top layer. That red really comes through right there because I painted that a little bit earlier. I let it sit and then put another color on top, maybe about 5 minutes later. And then when I was to take it off, then it had these really cool lines and textures. I actually end up getting some lighter values, and I know these will be very interesting in my funky face project. Now I'm ready to begin my funky face, but before I do that, I'm going to look at some pictures of different faces. Some of these faces may be cartoon looking, maybe realistic. The colors may have changed, the shapes may have changed. You'll notice that every artist takes their own approach. I really love looking at illustrators, so I tend to choose a lot of books to look at. I love reading books on art and just really getting familiar with the different designs. Eric Carle is one of my favorite. He is very similar to what we're going to be doing, or his style is very similar. We're going to be cutting some different shapes and repositioning them in an organized fashion to make a fun face. Before putting my face together, I do like to look at a photograph of a face, also known as a self-portrait, and we're going to be cutting it very similar to this. We're going to cut into lots of little parts. I'm going to make sure I have a part for eyes, nose, mouth, hair, and so forth. I'm going to get my papers. I actually waited a few hours before getting these papers and cutting them. I wanted to make sure they were thoroughly dry so that my cuts would be very clean and easy to cut. So now that I have such a great variety of different textures and secondary colors, I may also grab a couple other supplies like my scissors, glue, maybe some extra papers I had. I love using a Sharpie marker or black marker. You can get a couple of sets of your markers or crayons or whatever you have. Don't feel like you have to get all of that, but you definitely need some scissors to be able to cut with to begin. You may notice there's also a blue paper behind me laying on my red sheet, and that is where I'm going to be gluing everything. I am not going to be cutting that blue paper. That is going to be kind of my spot where I can set everything in and arrange it. All right, I'm going to have a little fun cutting out some different shapes. I'm going to move along a little quicker, and you can see how I go about arranging those shapes. I got to get all my parts first, and then I start kind of playing around with the arrangement. Sometimes I make a shape I don't like, and then I change it up. I do try to get different shapes and lines, like in my previous video. Some of the shapes you'll recognize, like square, circle, rectangle. In this one, I'm mainly using organic shapes, I have to say, where I just kind of make the shapes up myself to kind of fit my composition or my picture. All right, I'm going to have a little fun cutting, gluing, and arranging. Can't wait to see how yours turns out too, but check out the process. Notice I have not glued anything yet. I've really been focused on first just cutting out some different shapes, playing around where the shapes go, arranging them on the page until I get what's called an interesting composition. Composition's all about how your lines, shapes, colors, textures all come together to make a picture. I take a little while. I will start gluing pretty soon, but I really like to take time to play with the shapes that I have, put them in different orders, arrange them. I rarely, actually I could say never, get it right the first time. I really have to do what's called a lot of creative play. I test one shape out, see if it works. If it doesn't work for me, I actually sometimes make it smaller, maybe make it bigger, put it in a different spot, eliminate it. Sometimes I get rid of it and put something else up. It's kind of like when you're editing a video. It's the same feeling, actually. It's kind of interesting. So play with your shapes, your designs, your colors before you begin gluing. Another really cool tip you can use to get your shapes just right to the edge of your larger paper is to trace. Mark lines where you know it's going to end before you cut. So I kind of lay it right where I want it, and then I'll trace a line either on the back or the front depending on how it works out. And then when I'm cutting it, I actually get those two edges to line up just how I like it. So now that I'm getting a little bit more confident in where I want a couple of my pieces to go and stay, this is where I get the glue stick out and start making a commitment to where I would like these shapes to go. I'm not going to worry about taking them off, although I still may, but I'm pretty about 99% sure I know I like where it goes. So make sure when you're using that glue stick that you cover your entire area. Always kind of brush away from your hand, and then you can get your edges, your corners, and your papers can lay down really well. I have a lot of students that like to just put glue in the middle, and then the next day they pick up their design, they have their papers falling off. So make sure you're being very careful when adding your glue and putting it all along the edges, and then even give a little bit to the center to making sure that you get it. Don't push too hard where you smush your glue stick. I do prefer a glue stick over the wet glue. The wet glue tends to come out really fast and it takes a long time to dry. It's just harder to control. So try to use your glue stick if you can and get those edges really well before sticking down. Now that I'm done with my collage work of a lot of cutting and gluing, I'm using that black Sharpie to kind of highlight some of the marks that I made with my paintbrush previously. You do not have to use a black Sharpie. Use what you have available. It could be a black color pencil. It could be a completely different color. As an artist, I like you to make your own choices creatively. It's really important for all of us to put our own unique touches to our designs. So these type of choices are completely up to you as an artist. Never feel like you have to copy mine. I'm hoping that when you turn your artwork in, it is going to look very different than mine. The only thing that will be the same is that you have secondary colors that have been made from the primary colors, and the fact that you have cut and glued them to make a fun, funky face. If you want to see a wonderful artist that does this very beautifully, Pablo Picasso is a great abstract artist. He takes realistic imagery and twists, changes the colors, adds lines, patterns. He does an amazing job. I will probably show you maybe him in a later project. But for now, enjoy having a little fun with our funky faces.